Hi guys, my name is Snodesmannen and I wrote a little game called Galimulator. And I get lots of questions about this game. What does this do? How do I do this? And how do I do that? And there's actually so many little things about this game which I've had so much fun making. And I wanted to make a video where I show you guys 10 things which you probably don't know about the game. Some of them you definitely don't know. So let's go through them all. Number 1 are lunar monuments. So empires can build artifacts, and one of the artifacts that they can build is the lunar monument. And I get the question, what does this artifact actually do? And interestingly enough, it doesn't do anything. So this was one of the first monuments that I put into the game. And something which I always had in mind originally here is that this is not really a game where you're watching all of these empires trying to take control of the galaxy, but rather they're just doing their own thing, and they will do things which are not beneficial or that don't actually matter or don't mean anything or even detrimental. That's why they degenerate and bad things happen to them, basically. So I wanted to simulate this instead of just a bunch of min-maxing super AIs. And actually, the lunar monument, the way I envision it, it's just the ruler basically carving his own face or her own face into a moon. And that's it. So this is going to consume a bunch of resources. It does actually have some in-game effects. So one, it consumes 99% of the wealth of the star when it's built. But after that, it actually does some good things. So it helps to lure additional trade ships into that region. So in the long run, it might actually build wealth. It also has the effect of preventing the empire from building anything else. That's pretty much it. So the lunar monument, it does nothing, and it's very much by design. And next up is the neutral empire. So some of these stars, they are not owned by anyone. They are just basically independent, let's say. And the way I chose to represent this internally is basically by having an empire which is known as the neutral empire. And the neutral empire technically owns all of these stars. So in a way it's a known empire, but in most ways it's not. So there's lots of special cases for it. It doesn't have an emperor leading it. It can't have peace. It cannot even have war, really, with the other empires. It can't attack. It can't research. It cannot switch states by itself, at least. And actually all of the monsters you build, they're also technically on the neutral side. Though it doesn't mean that they get along very well. Even meteors are actually on the neutral side. So it's like an empire, but not an empire. Yeah, this thing, for instance, what's it called? The strange fish. It's also belonging to the neutral empire. But there's some fun things you can do with this. So people have found out basically many ways you can exploit and have fun with the neutral empire. And one of the ways is that you can actually make it transcend by going here and just choosing transcend, and you'll notice that all of these monsters they do the customary dance that empires do when they transcend, which is to say they go nuts. So I haven't actually seen that on this monster before, so that's kind of cute. It can also in theory it gets ships, so these ships, they are not built by the neutral empire, but they are still owned. So they actually are normal ships which have a mutiny and then rebel and go over to the neutral side as opposed to some other side. It sometimes happens. And even if they own dropships, they can actually technically occupy other stars because dropships continue to operate. And you can even take control of them as Emperor mode. The person who discovered this was regular forumite Suber36G. So cheers to him. I had no idea you can even do it, but you can do it. And actually, they can advance in tech. I've heard rumors about this happening, actually. So what can happen is that if a science ship goes through a mutiny and is taken over by the neutral empire, neutral ships have the interesting effect. So if they travel to 30 different stars in systems not owned by their own empire, they will basically grant their owners a 1 tech level. And this can happen to neutral if they take control of science ships, a very rare type of ships. So that's all about the neutral empire. Next up, number 3, the Eater of Stars. So the Eater of Stars was probably the first or the second monster that I added to the game, and it's quite a simple one. So all it really does is that, oh, here we go. It starts off somewhere in the middle of the galaxy, and then it will travel to 5 stars it picks randomly. Let's speed things up. Let's see if I can do that while recording. Yeah, I could. It picks off a star and then goes to the next one, somewhere far away, generally, and somewhere else. So it tags these 5 stars, and once it's done, it will proceed to the middle of the stars. While doing this, it says some sort of blurbs. I meant them to be a little bit dark. They say things which are not so nice. That's okay. It's a star-eating monster after all. At the end of this, it will cluster towards the center, and the shape sometimes forms a pentagram, and it just destroys everything. I didn't mean for it to form a pentagram, but of course I will not remove it. In the old days, it was too fast, but it was also too slow to maneuver, so it would eventually not be able to reach a star, but just instead orbit around it. I had to fix that one. There's a line it says, which is basically, in the heart of structure we find confusion. And this is a quote, a lyric from an old song I made. If you can find it, and I think it's out there floating somewhere on the internet, I'll be incredibly impressed. Next up, incredibly exciting topic, pathfinding. So pathfinding is what the ships do when they want to go from one place to the next. So you see this ship here is heading somewhere, the Tindler, the psychedelic, it's heading here. And it's going there by having an algorithm figure out what's the fastest path. And it's a proper algorithm, so it will find the optimal path. And if the path is blocked, it will reroute basically. But there's one exception to this, maybe two, but there's one important exception to this, which is the, where am I? The Marauder. This was, if not the first and the second one. This one uses a stupid algorithm to make its way from here to basically the edge of the galaxy. It uses an algorithm which I think might be called Theseus rope, something like this, which makes it really meander around and then go back maybe sometimes and meander around. And the idea is just to give this give an effect that it's basically complete, just roaming around and destroying things as opposed to having some specific goal. Actually, in I think the last release or the update after it, I changed the trade ships to use a similar algorithm to find their way. This is for performance reasons. There are a lot of trade ships that distribute wealth, and you were always using the optimal algorithm, but it's relatively expensive. So as of the update a couple of months ago, it's using this cheaper one, which means it will always find its way, but it might sort of happen to fall upon other stars and give them some wealth. So the wealth trees might be a bit different, but shouldn't be so that much different. Okay, next step up will be defense bonuses. Okay, and by defense bonuses, I mean basically the fact that all of these ships in space, some of them give bonuses when they are defending or even actually attacking stars. Because I think that's what ships do. And there's also some artifacts like the stellar force field, etc. And I'm going to give you some numbers for this. So the force field, if you have a force field on a system, it's the equivalent of 3 tech levels superiority, which is pretty good. So that's a pretty good artifact. There's some other bonuses. Let me give you some examples. So the battleship, for instance, a level 1 battleship will give you the equivalent of 1 tech level. 2, 3 will give you equivalent of 2 tech levels, and if you have a battleship that's level 4 or above, it will give the equivalent of 3 tech levels. So having a level 4 battleships orbiting your star or close to the star, it's about as good as what the hell's going on? It's about as good as having a force field artifact, actually. Motherships are the same as battleships at 1 level above. So a level 4 mothership is actually gives you equivalent of 4 tech levels when you're attacking or defending those stars. So those guys are pretty impressive things. And you also get other bonuses, of course, from religions or even states, those sort of things. All right, that's it. Next up will be ashes. Okay, so all of the empires, they have different empire states. And the default one to start with is the empire is expanding. Then they sometimes go into fortifying mode, where they focus more on research and defense. and they don't attack as much. And then there's also degenerating, where they essentially lose tech and just go downhill. Sometimes there are rarer ones as well. There's Blood Purge. I'm adding a new one called Crusade, Rioting. But my favorite is the one called All Will Be Ashes, where they basically decide that they've had enough of life in the galaxy and want to burn it all down. They get a big bonus. They first of all break all of their peace treaties, then they get a big attack bonus. And the bad thing is that they also burn down every star which is considered developed at that time. So they basically spread across the galaxy like wildfire, taking colonies and then burning them down. And if they can, sometimes they get back. Let's give, for instance, these guys that trait and see what happens. They didn't have any undeveloped stars, so that was really boring. But sometimes you have huge empires that just spread out like this, and it's like a fire, essentially. The name itself, All Will Be Ashes, comes from another game, which is one of my favorite games, actually. It's by another Swedish developers called Illwinter, I believe. It's Dominions 3, which you probably played. There's some crazy, insane gods in there called Tartarians, and sometimes they will just ignore your orders and sit where they want, I think pillaging the countryside and giving you the quote, all will be ashes sometimes. That's where it's from. Okay, next up will be Interceptors. And for Interceptors, maybe I can even be brief. So I didn't do that. They went all will be ashes by themselves, actually. So interestingly, Interceptors are basically the stuff that shoots out of these things. So it looks like they're at peace. Let's make war. Send those guys here. So you will see that they dispatch little ships. Here we go. They shoot from them. And we can also build a super carrier, the latest ship, which has lots of them. And the same mechanism is actually used in Elder things. They're swarmlings. So an interesting implementation detail with all of this stuff is when these ships complete their mission because they run out of fuel or because they run out of targets and they head home and they succeed in docking, they are tragically destroyed. The ships themselves don't survive. And the next time they dispatched, a new ship is created. And this created an interesting moral dilemma for me, because I thought this wasn't fair to the pilots that were piloting the ships, that they were to be simply destroyed. Oh, here come the ghosts. Maybe I'll mention them as well. I thought it would be better if those pilots were to survive and have another chance for glory later on. So I had to struggle some ways to do this because, initially I had them survive, but they were working for the Empire as flight trainers, I believe. But now they are actually employed. Maybe there are no survivors here, but nowadays they are actually employed on the ships as reserve pilots, and they tend to get those positions as ship officers, actually as fighter pilots, when they are created for the second time, but not always. And I think this is the only case where people can actually jump from one job to another job at a lower level. So they go from fighter pilot to reserve pilot. Just a small detail. I think it's interesting. You probably don't. So let's go to the next one, which could be maybe Wardens. Okay, so Wardens, these are ships that show up to defend essentially their lost master's legacy. They look like this. This is the Warden of the faulty Junta of Varennes, which used to hang out in this part of space, but then I destroyed them. But they generally only show up if an empire has conquered the galaxy. So if you have this huge empire, they conquer the galaxy, and then they sadly die. There's a 10% chance, assuming that they built their artifact, a 10% chance that Warden will spawn there. And it will basically just hang around there. It is actually a neutral one, though it's a neutral one which is colored according to their previous owners, which I think is a first, where a neutral ship is colored after a star, or colored after an empire. and it will just basically hang around there. It can be really powerful. It has lots of weapons and quite a lot of hit points, and it can survive for quite long and become really annoying. But in this place, you can see that it was not accidentally stationed at the site where that empire built their artifact. So that artifact somehow contains the secret of it. And now it's providing a defense bonus actually to the neutral empire and defending those stars. But the warden can be destroyed not only by brute force, but actually by destroying the artifact. So if the artifact that produced this warden is destroyed, the warden also goes. That's all about wardens. Next up will be something about ship construction. Empires can build lots of ships, and I'll just ramble them all for you. They can build battleship, dropships, frigates, carriers, supercarriers, motherships, maintenance ships, raiders, gunboats, terror ship, ruptor ship, disruptor ships, science ships, gun stations, destroyers, tent apprentices, illuminator ships, great wheels, and imperial explosives museums. And you can unlock them all in sandbox mode. Some of them are produced only in special cases. For instance, let me check, you can probably see here. So for instance, the disruptor ship is built about 101% of the time. The most rare ships are the Imperial Explosives Museums. Only about 1 in 1,000 ships, actually less than this, will be built. And there's also some other rare ships. The super carrier is the same rarity. And also the science ship is a quite rare one. Actually, initially the frigates, they were called fighters, these guys. I called them fighters because they were fighters and battleships just back then. But people complained too much. They really didn't like the idea of fighters beating battleships, so I had to rename them to frigates to stop the public hysteria about the topic. Alright, so next one. Ground forces. I think the most common complaint or the most common feature request I get, aside from multiplayer support, is why is there no representation of ground combat in the game? Well, it's there, I guess, but it's so abstracted. So, I mean, it's just the stars sometimes flip control, and it's probably due to ground combat or something like this. And actually, some time ago, I tried to resolve this. I tried to actually implement ground combat. And it went pretty far. I actually had a model that sort of worked and it was up and running. The basic idea was that every star owned one army or something like this. Let's say an army, which was represented by a little, well, let's say a ship anyway. And this army would be transported around the galaxy and be used in combat. And if it was lost, it would be slowly rebuilt, basically. So you would need to be, in theory, strategic about where to place those ground forces. And then you need to make sure that you were able to conquer the stars, etc., etc. And this was working. I think I had implemented pretty much everything. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But it was ridiculous. It didn't work. It was first of all, the AI was so stupid, and I'm not that good at AI. And it was just making so many ridiculous decisions, and it was just ended up being lots of circles traveling all across the galaxy. It didn't make any sense at all. So I had to make the tough decision I need to make sometimes, which was basically scrap the whole thing. So I just started deleting the code. I mean, it's in the source repository somewhere, but that code is gone, and I don't think I'll revisit the topic. So yeah, sadly I give it a go, but at the end of the day, I think it was a bit too much. I bit off more than I could chew on this topic. So you will not see ground forces anytime soon in Galimulator. I actually had a video of it where it was running, and I would love to show it to you, but I can't because I deleted it because I don't know, I wanted to save disk space or something. So instead you've been watching the flippant Sickin electorate fight the gleaming association of, I can't even see what they're called, Kasuda, and I hope you enjoyed it. So I think this was the entire list of 10 things you probably did not know about Galimulator. Meanwhile, I hope there's many things you do know about the game, and I hope that you continue to enjoy it. I for sure am having a lot of fun developing it, and I will continue to do so until I get tired of it. And it's always amazing to me how many people find it interesting and like to play it. And I do enjoy reading all of the suggestions you guys have. Of course, I cannot implement most of them, but I'm doing something. So in this next update, which I hope is out this month, maybe next one, we'll see. One of the big things is political factions instead of randomly caused rebellions. I'm working on planets, so you can see basically a little bit of what they look like here. There's a couple of planets there. Some of them, I mean, it's sort of nice to have things, but I'm always looking for new ideas. So please let me know if you have them. Join the Discord. Tell your friends. You can even subscribe to the channel if you like. That's all for today, and I'll see you guys next time.